The chandeliers above the ballroom glittered like frozen constellations, their light cascading over gowns stitched with diamonds and tuxedos tailored in silence. Crystal glasses clinked, the air heavy with perfume and old money arrogance. At the heart of the gala, where wealth and whispers converged, Ava Richardson, a 38-year-old black woman who had built her billion-dollar tech empire from nothing, stood like a flame among marble pillars. Her presence was radiant, sleek ebony gown, hair swept back, eyes unflinching. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not in their world, not at this table where last names carried legacies older than nations. Yet here she was, invited because the board of the Winthrop family, one of the most powerful dynasties in the country, wanted her groundbreaking software. The whispers said the deal was worth $1 billion. Ava knew it was more than money. It was validation, proof that brilliance could shatter any barrier. But brilliance alone has never been enough. As she raised her glass to speak, laughter rippled at another table. Then came the smirk, then the sneer, and finally, like a slap delivered through the air before the real one struck, words that sliced deeper than any knife. "Don't get too comfortable, sweetheart," said Richard Winthrop Jr., his voice slick with privilege. "You're just lucky we even let you in this room." A hush fell, the kind that exposes every heartbeat. Ava steadied her breath, years of discipline keeping her face composed. But before she could reply, before dignity could cloak her in silence, it happened. A hand lashed across her face. Gasps cracked the air like glass breaking. Time stilled, the sound of the slap echoing against marble and chandeliers, against centuries of history that said women like Ava should bow their heads. She did not bow. Ava's eyes burned, not with tears, but with fire. The billionaire family expected her to shrink, to swallow the humiliation for the prize on the table. $1 billion, one deal that could cement her company's place forever. They thought she would sell her soul for it. Instead, she reached for her clutch, calm, deliberate. She straightened her shoulders, turned her back on the wealth, the whispers, the chandeliers, and walked away. Walked away from $1 billion, walked away from their validation, walked away with her dignity intact. Behind her, silence roared louder than applause. In that silence, she left them with something money could never buy: the image of a black woman refusing to be broken. And though the night ended with one deal undone, the world beyond those walls was already shifting. Because sometimes walking away is louder than any contract, and sometimes the greatest wealth is the courage not to sell your soul. For the chandeliers and champagne, before billion-dollar deals and invitations gilded with embossed letters, there was a girl standing in the back of a Detroit library with calloused hands in second-hand clothes. Ava Richardson had grown up in a world where opportunity was not a birthright, but a battle. Her mother, Denise, worked double shifts as a nurse, her hands always smelling faintly of sanitizer and exhaustion, while her father, Marcus, a retired mechanic, spent his nights teaching her how to fix broken radios and cars that others would have thrown away. "Everything broken can be rebuilt," he used to tell her, placing grease-stained wrenches into her small hands. "The trick isn't having the best tools, it's believing you can make something run again." It wasn't just machines Ava learned to repair, it was herself. It was her belief in what the world told her she couldn't do. At school, teachers sometimes mistook her silence for weakness. Classmates whispered about her skin, her braids, her thrift store dresses. But Ava's eyes were always fixed on something beyond the walls, on ideas, on equations, on the way code could weave a language that machines obeyed. By 15, she was sneaking into community college classes, hungry for knowledge. By 19, she had a scholarship that barely covered her meals, but she coded through the night, building programs for local businesses, fixing bugs for startups that dismissed her until her work forced them to take her seriously. It was in those sleepless years that Ava birthed the foundation of SynTech, the company that would one day rival Silicon Valley giants. She didn't start with investors or boardrooms. She started with a cracked laptop on a kitchen table, fueled by coffee, determination, and the sound of her mother's weary voice reminding her, "Baby, you're going to change this world." But every step up the ladder came with resistance. Banks turned down her applications. Investors told her to find a white co-founder if she wanted serious money. Venture capitalists praised her pitch, then asked if she had thought of taking on a more presentable face for big meetings. Some didn't even look her in the eye. Still, Ava pushed forward. Every no was fuel, every insult a spark. By 28, Syntech was revolutionizing cybersecurity for hospitals, protecting patient data with innovations so airtight they forced the industry to take notice. Contracts came in, slowly at first, then in a flood. The little girl from Detroit was suddenly a CEO, commanding respect in rooms that once refused her entry. But Ava never forgot the slights. She remembered the smirks, the doubt, the racism dressed in polite tones. That memory shaped her steel spine. It was why she demanded perfection from her team, why she expected discipline and grit, why she never let herself show weakness in public. Which is what made the invitation to the Winthrop Gala both intoxicating and dangerous. The Winthrops weren't just wealthy, they were legacy, old money, tied to railroads, oil, and politics. Their deals shaped markets, and their approval could catapult companies into global dominance. For decades, they had funded industries, but rarely had they touched technology, until Ava. Syntech's encryption was revolutionary, something the Winthrops wanted for their banking empire. On paper, the partnership was perfect. Their money, her innovation. But in reality, Ava knew walking into that ballroom meant stepping onto a battlefield. The week before the gala, her advisors warned her. Ava, they'll test you, her COO Javier said over late-night coffee in their glass-walled office. They'll want to see if you can bend, if you flinch, if you'll bow to their rules. Ava leaned back, staring at the city lights beyond her office. I didn't build this company to bend, she said quietly. And I sure as hell didn't come this far to sell my soul. Still, beneath her certainty, a flicker of unease burned. She knew how fragile power was when you weren't born into it. For all her brilliance, for all her contracts, for all the awards on her office wall, there were people waiting for her to stumble. People who believed she didn't belong. The night of the pian, as her driver pulled up to the mansion where the Winthrops held court, Ava caught her reflection in the car window. A vision of elegance, yes, but also of defiance. Her gown was flawless, but beneath the silk and diamonds was the same girl from Detroit, carrying the voice of her father. Everything broken can be rebuilt. As she stepped out, camera flashes lit up the entrance. Reporters whispered her name, some with admiration, some with envy. Inside, chandeliers glittered like constellations, music floated from a string quartet, and conversations buzzed like static. Ava felt the eyes, the measuring glances, the subtle sneers masked as smiles. The normal world she had built for herself, the safety of her company, her team, her office, was gone. Here she was back in a place where one misstep could cost her everything. And yet, she lifted her chin, straightened her back, and entered, carrying not just herself but the weight of every girl who had ever been told she didn't belong. Little did she know, by the end of the night, they wouldn't just test her. They would cross a line so brutal, so demeaning, it would ignite something far bigger than any contract. The grand ballroom of the Winthrop estate was a cathedral of wealth. Marble floors polished so smooth they reflected the chandeliers above. Walls lined with portraits of ancestors who had bought power generations ago, and waiters gliding silently with silver trays of champagne that glittered like liquid gold. Conversations hummed in low, elegant tones, the language of old money. Ava's entrance did not go unnoticed. Heads turned, some with admiration, others with thinly veiled curiosity, a few with disdain. A black woman in her early 30s, commanding her own billion-dollar company, walking into their world. It was both novelty and disruption. At her side, Javier, her COO, leaned close. Smile, but don't give them too much, he murmured. They'll be watching for weakness. Ava smirked faintly. I'm not here to entertain, she whispered back, her eyes fixed forward. The first test came quickly. An older gentleman with a shock of white hair and a sapphire cufflink the size of a coin intercepted her path. His name was Charles Ashcroft, one of the Winthrop's closest allies, a banker whose fortune spanned continents. Ah, so you're the Young lady we've heard so much about, he said, dragging out the word lady like it was a child's costume. Syntech, isn't it? Quite impressive for your background. Ava held his gaze, her lips forming a polite smile. It's amazing what brilliance can achieve, Mr. Ashcroft, she said smoothly. Regardless of background. The man blinked, unused to being countered so directly. He chuckled, but his eyes narrowed as she passed. They pressed forward, each interaction like a hidden blade. A woman dripping in emeralds leaned in to whisper, Darling, who designed your gown? It's stunning, though not the sort of couture I'd expect here. Another man asked her casually if Syntech had government clearance, then quickly followed it with, Of course, I assume you know how complicated those contracts can be for smaller firms. Every remark was carefully crafted, not direct enough to be called insulting, but sharp enough to sting. Ava didn't flinch. She had prepared for this. She returned each barb with grace, each subtle dismissal with precision. But inside she felt the familiar burn, the same one she had felt in classrooms, in boardrooms, on the other side of too many locked doors. The Winthrops themselves arrived fashionably late, as though they were royalty. Victor Winthrop, tall, silver-haired, with an air of effortless authority, walked with his wife, Elaine, whose diamond necklace caught every beam of light in the room. Their children trailed like ornaments. Perfect hair, perfect posture, perfect arrogance. The crowd shifted as they entered, forming subtle orbits around them. Ava and Javier approached, protocol demanding it. Miss Richardson, Victor said, his voice booming with performative warmth. So pleased you could join us. We've been watching Syntech with great interest. You've done remarkable work. Thank you, Ava replied evenly. We're proud of what we've built. Indeed, Victor continued, swirling his glass of wine. Though of course building is one thing, maintaining, now that's another. Partnerships like ours could give you stability. A shield, you might say, against the turbulence of the market. It wasn't just an offer. It was a warning. Ava met his eyes, unflinching. Syntech was forged in turbulence, she said quietly. We're stronger for it. Victor's smile froze, then thawed into something colder. Confident. I like that. The music swelled, and for a while the evening slipped into a rhythm of handshakes, introductions, and veiled challenges. Yet beneath the surface, the tension grew heavier, like storm clouds gathering. At dinner, it became impossible to ignore. Ava was seated at the head table between Victor and Elaine, under the glow of chandeliers. The menu was exquisite, truffle risotto, seared lamb, vintage wines, but every bite tasted like scrutiny. So tell me, Miss Richardson, Elaine began sweetly, what sacrifices did you make to climb so high? Surely family, marriage, children. Ava felt the heat rise in her chest. She kept her voice calm. My sacrifices are no different than any man who's ever built a company from the ground up. I chose to focus. That's why we're here tonight. Elaine tilted her head. A shame though. A woman with no roots, well, some people might call that unstable. Victor chuckled low, adding, though perhaps it works in your favor. You can be married to your company. The laughter around the table was polite but cutting. Ava placed her fork down gently, her expression unreadable. She excused herself for air. Out on the balcony, she gripped the railing, breathing deeply. The night sky stretched wide, stars scattered across it like sparks. For a moment, the weight of it all pressed down. She remembered her father's words, everything broken can be rebuilt, and held on to them like a lifeline. Javier appeared behind her. They're trying to push you off balance, he said softly. I know, Ava replied. Her eyes glinted. And they're going to regret it. The evening rolled forward. Champagne loosened tongues, music swirled, laughter rang louder, and the masks began to slip. Ava noticed glances exchanged, whispers traded, a cruel anticipation in the air. The Winthrops weren't finished. They were waiting. The final test came during the toast. Victor rose, his glass raised high. Tonight, he declared, we celebrate partnerships, legacy, and the bright future that awaits when tradition meets innovation. He gestured to Ava, and we are honored, truly honored, to welcome Ms. Ava Richardson into our circle. Though, he added with a smirk, one wonders if brilliance alone is enough to carry the weight of this legacy. The room chuckled, and Victor leaned closer to her, his voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. Show us you belong. He clinked his glass against hers, the sound sharp as a gavel. Ava lifted her glass, her smile radiant, though her heart pounded. She could feel it, the trap closing, the cruelty about to strike. The Winthrops didn't just want her partnership. They wanted her humiliation. They wanted to remind her that in their world, she was an intruder. And by the end of that night, they would go further than even Ava imagined. The night had ripened into its cruelest form. The chandeliers shimmered like frozen fire. The orchestra's strings stretched thin across the ballroom, and laughter hung in the air, sharp, brittle, intoxicated. The Winthrops' guests were buzzing with champagne and superiority, their conversations flowing louder, less restrained. Ava could feel it in the marrow of her bones. Something was coming. Victor Winthrop leaned back in his chair, one hand draped lazily across the table, the other swirling his glass. His eyes glittered with the satisfaction of a predator who believed the trap was already sprung. Around him, his allies chuckled, their gazes darting toward Ava like spectators awaiting a performance. Then Elaine rose. Her sequined gown caught the light as she tapped her spoon against her glass, the sounds silencing the hall. Ladies and gentlemen, she said smoothly, her voice slicing through the chatter, we are gathered here not only to celebrate tradition, but to test the strength of the future we invite into our circle. She turned her eyes, sharp, cold, and merciless, toward Ava. And tonight we have among us a remarkable guest, a woman who has built something extraordinary. The applause was light, hesitant. Ava inclined her head slightly, her expression calm though her pulse hammered. But, Elaine continued, her smile widening with venom, sometimes brilliance requires a reminder of humility. There it was, the shift, the line they would cross. Elaine gestured, and one of the younger Winthrop sons, handsome, smug, already drunk on entitlement, stepped forward. He carried a small, ornate box, like a magician preparing a trick. With a flourish, he opened it, revealing an old wrench, rusted, crude, out of place in the gleaming ballroom. Ladies and gentlemen, Elaine declared, this is a tribute to Miss Richardson's humble beginnings, a tool for fixing cars. The laughter that erupted was sharp, merciless. She was, after all, Elaine added sweetly, a mechanic's daughter, was she not? Imagine climbing from grease-stained garages to marble halls. Quite the fairy tale. A ripple of derision passed through the room. Someone clapped mockingly. Another called out, careful, or she'll try to fix our engines. Ava's breath stilled in her chest. The wrench glinted under the chandeliers, a symbol meant to drag her back into the dirt. But Elaine wasn't finished. With a suddenness that made the room gasp, Elaine dropped the wrench into Ava's lap. The weight was cold, metallic, humiliating. Why don't you show us, Ms. Richardson, she purred. Show us that magic touch. Fix something. Prove you belong here. The laughter grew louder, crueler. Someone at the back shouted, yes! Let's see if the mechanic's daughter still remembers her trade. And then, like lightning, Victor's hand flashed. He struck her, a sharp, calculated slap across her cheek. The sound cracked through the ballroom, silencing everything. Ava's head turned with the blow. Her skin burned, her body rigid. For a moment, there was only the ringing in her ears, the taste of copper, the stunned hush of 100 eyes watching. It wasn't just humiliation anymore. It was violence. It was domination, plain and raw. Victor leaned in, his whisper venomous. Now you know your place. The silence that followed was suffocating. No one moved. No one spoke. The world seemed to hold its breath. And then Ava rose. Slowly, deliberately, she placed the wrench on the table, her fingers steady despite the fire raging in her chest. She lifted her chin, her eyes sweeping the room, eyes that no longer sought approval, no longer feared judgment. Do you want to know my place? She said, her voice low but carrying to every corner of the hall. The silence deepened. The orchestra stopped. Even the chandeliers seemed to still. My place, she continued, her voice gaining strength with every word, is wherever I choose to stand. My father taught me that when the world tried to keep him on his knees. He told me everything broken can be rebuilt. And I believed him. She turned, facing Victor fully now, her cheeks still burning, but her gaze unyielding. You can slap me. You can laugh at me. You can throw your rusted symbols of mockery in my lap. But none of it changes what I've built. None of it changes the fact that SynTech is the future, and you're terrified of it. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, eyes that had moments ago sparkled with cruelty, now flickered with unease. You wanted me humiliated, Ava said, her voice rising. But let me be clear, I don't need your billion-dollar deal, because no partnership, no amount of money is worth selling my dignity. I walked into this room with my company intact, with my vision unshaken, and with my father's legacy burning in my heart. And I will walk out the same way, stronger. She stepped back from the table, her gown flowing around her like armor. For a moment, no one moved. The power shift was palpable, a current running through the marble floor. Victor's jaw clenched, his hand twitching as though itching for control he had just lost. Elaine's smile faltered. Their guests, sensing the fracture in the Winthrop's authority, whispered among themselves, some even nodding faintly in admiration. Ava turned to Javier, who had risen silently at her side, his eyes burning with pride. Let's go, she said simply. And then she walked, head high, step steady, through the ballroom that had been meant to crush her. Each stride echoed against the marble, a sound louder than the orchestra, louder than the laughter that had filled the night. By the time she reached the doors, the silence had become reverence. A black woman, struck in the heart of old money's kingdom, had refused to bow, and in her refusal she had shattered their illusion of power. The doors of the ballroom swung shut behind her, muffling the stunned whispers and clinking glasses. The cool night air wrapped around Ava like a baptism, washing away the suffocating perfume and poisoned laughter inside. For the first time that evening, she felt like she could breathe. The city stretched before her, its skyscrapers gleaming like steel giants against the velvet sky. Her cheeks still burned from Victor's hand, but the fire in her chest burned brighter. Javier walked silently beside her, his jaw clenched tight, his gaze flicking back at the hall they had just left. You didn't just walk out on a deal, he said finally, his voice quiet but fierce. You walked out on their chains. Ava exhaled slowly, her shoulders heavy, yet lighter than they had been in years. I walked out on them, Javier, but I didn't walk out on me. The chauffeur opened the sleek black car waiting at the curb, but Ava paused before climbing in. She turned back, her eyes sweeping over the grand estate glowing with opulence, its chandeliers blazing defiantly into the night. For all its power, all its wealth, the mansion suddenly seemed fragile, like a relic from a past that couldn't survive the truth. Inside, the Winthrops scrambled. The slap that had cracked across Ava's cheek had also cracked their reputation. Phones buzzed, guests whispered, reporters sniffed for stories. The untouchable family had revealed its ugliest face in front of the city's elite. But Ava wasn't there to see their empire wobble. She had chosen a different stage. By morning, the story had broken. Black CEO walks out of $1 billion deal after public humiliation. Winthrop's accused of racism and violence at Gala. Ava Richardson turns her back on old money and claims the future. News anchors replayed the footage captured by quick-thinking guests. The slap, the silence, the speech. Clips went viral on every platform, Ava's words echoing far beyond the marble walls that had tried to contain her. My place is wherever I choose to stand. It became a rallying cry. Employees, activists, entrepreneurs, and everyday people shared the clip, their comments flooding timelines. Some called her courageous. Others saw her as a mirror of their own battles, against prejudice, against glass ceilings, against hands that had tried to push them down. And at SynTech headquarters, the effect was seismic. Employees arrived at work with their heads higher, their steps sharper. Pride coursed through the offices, humming in the servers, glowing in the eyes of engineers and designers who had once feared they were too small to challenge the giants. Investors who had been lukewarm now flooded the company with calls. We want to back visionaries, they said. We want to back Ava Richardson. Ava stood before her team days later, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. We don't need their tables, she told them. We build our own. Thunderous applause shook the walls, but victory wasn't without scars. Alone in her office late one night, Ava traced the faint line on her cheek in the mirror. The sting had faded, but the memory hadn't. She thought of her father, hands scarred from years in the garage, and wondered what he would say. She thought of every woman, every black leader, every dreamer who had been told no with words, with laws, with hands. Her chest tightened, but she didn't cry. Instead, she whispered to her reflection, "We don't bow. Not now, not ever." The world outside her window glittered with possibility. The Winthrops tried damage control. They issued statements, hired PR firms, donated to causes they had never cared about before. But the stain was permanent. The image of Victor's hand against Ava's face had become a symbol, etched into the public consciousness, replayed on screens, dissected in editorials. It wasn't just about a slap. It was about centuries of hands raised against those who dared to stand tall. And when the lawsuits came, civil, criminal, financial, they didn't come quietly. Victims of the family's past dealings emerged emboldened. Partners cut ties. Their name, once synonymous with untouchable wealth, became synonymous with arrogance, cruelty, downfall. Ava didn't celebrate their ruin. She didn't need to. She had already won the night she chose herself. Months later, at a global innovation summit, Ava stood on stage in front of thousands. The lights were blinding, the applause deafening, but her voice cut through, clear, strong. "We are more than the insults hurled at us," she said. "We are more than the hands that try to hold us down. Dignity is not granted, it's owned. And when you refuse to give it up, no one can take it from you." The crowd rose to their feet. Among them were young women clutching notebooks, young men with fire in their eyes, dreamers who saw themselves not in the chandeliers of old money, but in the steel and sweat of building something new. As Ava stepped off stage, Javier caught her arm gently. "Do you realize," he said with a smile tugging at the corner of his lips, "that slap was the most expensive mistake Victor Winthrop ever made?" Ava laughed softly, a sound rich with release. "No," she replied. "The mistake was believing I'd ever need him." The two of them walked into the light of a future unchained, her father's lessons alive in every step. The world would remember that night, not for the cruelty inflicted, but for the dignity reclaimed. And Ava would carry it, not as a scar, but as a crown.